Hello everybody, I'm some loudmouth on the internet with an opinion. Well, I'm taking a quick break right now from movie reviews. Don't worry, I will still be making movie reviews on this channel. I'm not giving up on that. But I also want to do something else. Sometimes I just want to vlog about my opinions or make response videos if I see something that kind of irked me in a way. And here's a video that really did. If you're familiar with Paul Watson of InfoWars, he's basically an alt-right conspiracy theorist who works for the same company who employs Alex Jones. He's also been incredibly successful on YouTube, controlling a massive channel with nearly 700,000 subscribers. From my experience, anytime someone makes the title of their video the truth about something, you typically will not get the truth about anything in the video. Clickbait titles like that only serve to try to reinforce the ideas of whack conspiracy theories as the hidden truth behind events. Normally, I tend to ignore material relating to conspiracy theories because, having debated conspiracy theorists, I find them often very much immune to science and reason, always instead seeing bigger pictures and calling me a sheeple or someone who just believes everything he reads if I refuse to accept their completely unsupported conspiracy theories. But in the case of this video, I really felt like it needed a response because the issue of mental health is an issue that is very important to me, and the stigmatization of people suffering from mental illnesses I see as a massive problem in today's world, and I really applaud any efforts to correct that. Here's a video that seems to go strongly against that and actually argues, I'm not making this up and you'll see it later, for further stigmatization of mental health. As in, this is a video from a guy who thinks that people who suffering from mental illnesses that lead to depression haven't suffered enough and need more kick in the pants in order to feel better. Yeah. Needless to say, you will find no facts to be had in this video, so I decided to provide a few of my own to try to counteract it. I feel that someone who is a real expert on mental health, particularly a dedicated neurologist or a dedicated therapist, might be able to do a better job at this than I have, but I haven't seen anyone with those qualifications respond to this video yet, so I feel I would have to add my rather amateur voice to the mix, but here goes nothing anyway. Alright, here's my response.
1 in 10 Americans are now on antidepressants. 1 in 4 women in their 40s and 50s are on antidepressants. The rate of antidepressant use has increased 400% over the last 2 decades. The weather sucks, you're not getting enough sunlight, causing seasonal affective disorder. You're in the most debt, you're more likely to be sick. Christmas is just a memory, and your New Year's resolutions are already failing. So you're more prone to depression than at any other time of the year. But wait. Those factors have always been in play. None of this explains why depression has become so commonplace in modern society. Well, I'll tell you why. We're bathed in a culture that glorifies and fetishizes depression.
Fetishizes depression? AKA, you believe that young people or people in general today are more likely to be turned on by depression than before? That is a very odd claim. Let's see your sources on that. Studies on what people find most attractive in dates that found that both men and women, but particularly women, are attracted to high self-confidence, aka attracted to people who exhibit as little depression as humanly possible. In people with depression, this can actually create what's known as in science as a positive feedback loop. Being so depressed can often create a self-defeating attitude that can make dating very unsuccessful. And when your dating is unsuccessful, this will also lead to further depression. Thus, this can create a self-destructive cycle of failure and sadness that could eventually result in very disastrous self-destructive behavior. The notion that society fetishizes depression, the notion that depression is now seen as attractive, is bizarre. And it barely even warrants a response due to how absolutely contradictory to reality it truly is.
It's now a form of virtue signaling to constantly drone on about how depressed you are. You see it all over YouTube, these snivelling hug and confess videos made by privileged millennial brats who haven't had a proper day of hardship in their entire lives.
I generally agree that making YouTube videos about how depressed you are is generally a pretty bad idea, because if you put yourself out in the public sphere and if your video gets a lot of hits, you will inevitably attract certain individuals, certain sociopaths and bullies and the like, who will inevitably try to make your life worse. But people don't make videos like this because they want to signal their virtue. They make videos like this because they are desperate. They are trying to reach out to anyone who can help them. And making a public plea online is kind of just a last resort for it. But it's something that they feel they have to do because people who are near and close to them obviously have not been doing the job for them. While this may not be the right thing to do, it's something that should be at least sympathized with, not scorned.
Meanwhile, people living in African mud huts literally give zero fucks.
So depression as well as suicidal ideation is not a problem in Africans because they all live in mud huts and aren't as privileged? Well, let's go through the data and test that claim since, of course, you provide absolutely no data yourself on anything. In this list by the World Health Organization that tracks the level of suicide rates per 100,000 person in various different countries, we find that numerous African nations rank way ahead of the United States in terms of level of suicides. Among them, and forgive me if my pronunciation is wrong here, Guinea, Suriname, Mozambique, Tanzania, and I could go on. Several others also have higher suicide rates. So where does Mr. Watson get off even saying that people in Africa aren't as depressed or as childish as people here in the United States or the first world? There's absolutely no data to suggest that we have higher suicide rates than poor third world countries at all.
That constantly admitting weakness is a strength. It isn't. Strength of mind is strength. Being constantly brushed off course by the slightest breeze and then having a whining fit about it isn't.
There is not a single depressed person in the world who admits their depression because they think that makes them stronger. Quite the contrary, many are ashamed to admit their feelings because of the massive stigma surrounding depression. People admit their depression because they are seeking help, because they do not want to kill themselves. Ultimately, they do want to live, but they don't want their pain to continue. And thus, they oftentimes admit it in the hopes of finding some relief for their pain.
This idea that if we're not constantly sharing the latest chapter in our contrived mental breakdown for all the world to see, that we're somehow cold or inhuman. That's total BS.
And be merry, life would be a ding-a-dairy if I only had a brain.
Absolutely nobody is suggesting that you're cold or inhuman if you don't share every feeling or every bit of sadness you got. As a matter of fact, yes, it is much healthier in many different situations for you to keep things to yourself and keep yourself under control. Otherwise, you might end up saying something you regret, and that will lead to further depression later as you're like, oh, why did I say that? But seeking help for your condition is not simply going around and telling everybody how you feel. It's a completely legitimate strategy for trying to alleviate suffering due to a medical problem.
Oh, but there shouldn't be a stigma around depression anymore. That's mean. Yes, there should. Just as there should be a stigma around smoking and obesity.
This is what he said in the video that really prompted me to break my tradition of not making response videos and give this video a response. Here he suggests that society doesn't have enough stigma around depression, and he compares it to smoking and obesity. Did it ever occur to him that depression is one of the leading cause of why people turn to drug addiction or obesity? Let's say you became aware that in a couple days, a killer asteroid the size of Canada was about to plow into the planet and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Would you give a shit about how much weight you put on during that period? Would you care or think about the future when you behaved or did something unhealthy? Staying thin in today's society requires putting long-term health over short-term satisfaction. Eating that extra donut feels really good in the moment. It tastes good. It feels nourishing. But in 6 months, it'll lead to you being fatter and means you have to do more work if you ever want to lose the weight. In order to stay healthy, you need to think about your long-term health and long-term well-being over the short-term satisfaction. A person suffering from depression, particularly a person with suicidal ideation, is much less likely to do that because they might feel that they won't be around in a few months, so who cares if I eat that extra donut? Depression can create what's known as a positive feedback loop again. Just as it does with dating, it can do so with your weight. And as you gain weight, you become more depressed as a result of being fat.
Depression is not normal, but allowing yourself to be indoctrinated with this idea that it is is the primary reason why you can't beat it.
He is right that depression isn't normal, as in it is not a normal and healthy way to be. But neither is having cancer, neither is having infectious disease, neither is being born with a birth defect such as legs that don't properly work. And yet we still reach out and try to help people with those conditions. We don't try to stigmatize them and make them feel worse about it and say, suck it up and get over it.
Logically, the depression epidemic makes no sense. By every single objective factor, it's never been a better time to be a human being living in the West.
This is the only claim he makes that is 100% correct. By numerous objective measures, now really is the best time to be alive. World hunger rates are at an all-time low. Poverty rates are at an all-time low. We have technology today that dramatically improves our standard of living. And if you get an infectious disease, if you are struck with cancer, your chance of making through it today is higher than it's ever been. But here's the thing about mental health, though. Mental health treatments have lagged dramatically behind physical health treatments in terms of being able to alleviate suffering. Mental health doesn't really see it that way, okay? Some people in an objectively good situation, if they have a mental health issue, can't really focus on that. And that really is a medical problem. For example, just because someone's well-fed, if they have cancer, it's still a problem for them. And mental health really is the same way, all right? It's an illness, and an illness needs proper medical treatment.
Even amongst the poorest, our basic needs are met and exceeded. And depression was barely even a thing. It wasn't even talked about 50 or 60 years ago.
That's an extraordinary claim, Mr. Watson. So 50 or 60 years ago, depression wasn't nearly as prevalent as it is today. Where's your evidence to support that? Now, of course, I wasn't around 50 years ago either, but through the magic of internet statistics that can easily be searched, we can find out and test the claim that depression was less of a problem 50 years ago as it is today. How about we compare death by suicide rates over a 50-year period to see if it's true that depression was less of a thing 50 years ago than it is today. In the year 1960, the average number of deaths per 100,000 residents of the population due to suicide was 13.2 people. 50 years later, in the year 2010, the average death rate of suicides per 100,000 people was 12.1. As you can see, over that 50-year period, death rates by suicide actually fell. Now keep in mind, I was able to find that info in a Google search that took me less than 5 minutes. I didn't need to read a whole bunch of books. I didn't need to go to the Library of Congress. I just typed in what were the suicide rates in the 60s, and voila, I got results that completely contradicted Mr. Watson's claim. That shows how poorly researched InfoWars really is. How easy it is to prove them wrong.
So why is everyone so depressed now when we've got it so much easier? It's because you've been completely misled about what depression actually is. Depression is nothing more than dissatisfaction with life. It's temporary unhappiness. But the dominant culture in the pharmaceutical industry figured out that it could control people and make tons of money by treating depression as a pathological disease. So now depression is not unhappiness, but a medical condition, which it's the responsibility of the doctor to alleviate by medical means. And they're only too happy to, often being paid to do so, under the insane justification that depression is a chemical imbalance, which it isn't.
This is easily his most outrageous and nonsensical claim. Here he claims that all the vast medical research and all the vast scientific studies on the nature of depression really are just a conspiracy by the pharmaceutical industry to sell you antidepressive drugs. This is pure, unadulterated, tinfoil hat grade nonsense. It's very similar to people who say that all the studies that show that vaccines do not cause autism are all just a conspiracy for the pharmaceutical industry to profit from vaccines. It's all complete bunk. The medical industry has studied the causes of depression at the chemical level for decades and have found a distinct causal link between certain levels of chemicals in the brain and people having long-term depression. What's more is that it's found that depression is something that can be genetically inherited from parent to child. A study from the National Institute of Health, for example, found that 2 different studies that the inheritability of depression is between 40 to 50%, and family studies indicate a 2-fold or 3-fold increase in lifetime risk of developing major clinical depression. Now, I am neither a neurologist nor a geneticist, and I'm sure someone who is an expert in either of these fields could do a much more thorough and much better debunking of Mr. Watson's claims than I could, but it's very clear that Mr. Watson is clearly making up things based on his own prejudices and not due to any kind of examination of the data. His claim that depression is not a chemical imbalance in the brain and is not rooted in medical science is complete nonsense and should be ignored by any serious person.
Your mood cannot be independent of the way you live your life. You can't eliminate dissatisfaction with your life by taking pills.
At the risk of engaging in an appeal to authority, I think it's a little bit more wise to listen to what actual medical doctors who've spent years at medical school know about when it's appropriate to take pills than some guy on the site that employs Alex Jones.
I don't have all the answers.
Yeah, you didn't need to say that one twice.
Reject the normalization, glorification, and fetishization of mental illness.
And that's the end of the video. And all you ever got in a video labeled "The Truth About Depression" was various conspiracy theories, ramblings against the medical industry, science denial, and callous indifference towards the suffering of others. The large number of people that take InfoWars conspiracy theories and videos like this seriously is a very, very worrying trend for society, particularly when suicide is such a problem, particularly among the young. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States and the 2nd leading cause of death among young people aged 10 to 24. Male suicides are 4 times higher than female suicides, and in some parts of the West, such as the UK, it is the #1 cause of death among young men. Be honest. Anyone out there who's suffering from depression and sees this video, are they going to be like, who knew that I was only feeling this way because society was fetishizing my condition? I guess all I need to do is read a few books, alright, and put it all behind me and now I'll be better. Alright, I'll just put these razors down, put these pills down, put the gun down, and I'll just be fine. No, that's not how the real world works. In reality, depression already is heavily stigmatized. Further stigmatization is not going to help anyone. So instead, if you know anyone in your life who's depressed or you think might be depressed, lend them a helping hand. Call them randomly. Give them a pat on the back. Give them a hug. And tell them why their life matters and why they should feel happy to be alive. I'm some loudmouth on the internet. You just heard my opinion.